In London, lawmakers and Theresa May's government are trying to overcome deep divisions to set a final path forward on Brexit. Today, Mrs. May promised to resign if Parliament supported her version of the United Kingdom's divorce from the European Union. But members of Parliament have their own ideas and just minutes ago voted on different versions of Brexit. Nick Schifrin sorts through today's developments during one of the most important weeks in British politics in decades.
Judy, the debate over Brexit has divided the British people and political parties. For 2 years, Parliament has been unable to come to any kind of consensus. Lawmakers today tried to change that by voting on 8 different versions of Brexit. I'll get to the results in a minute, but first, listen to today's appeals of unity made by members of Parliament.
Mr. Speaker, this really is 5 minutes to midnight for this Parliament, for this government and for our country. We desperately need to find a way out of this mess. Our country has spent 2 years tied up in knots by the Prime Minister's incompatible red lines.
After years of paralysing conflict, we have a moral duty to open our minds this afternoon and reach for a compromise that will allow us to put the interminable Brexit row behind us.
It is going to be possible to end the catastrophic shambles of the last 6 months. We are beginning to talk about actually being able to take decisions founded on some sort of cross-party consensus and some search for a majority that can be sustained.
That call for consensus did not mute any mouths in Parliament, but it apparently fell on deaf ears, because take a look at the results of tonight's votes. Option 1, leave the European Union without a deal. Result, rejected. Options 2 through 5 were versions of a softer Brexit, meaning a closer relationship with Europe. Those included a frictionless relationship with the EU, an option to remain in the EU single market, an option to negotiate a permanent customs union, and option 4, the Labour Party's alternative, described as close alignment with the EU. All of those were rejected. Option 6, revoke Article 50, cancel Brexit entirely, rejected. And option 7, a second referendum, like the one that launched this process in 2016, but only after Parliament endorsed a deal, result, rejected. And option 8, basically a wish list of the people who want a complete divorce from the EU, result, rejected. So what does it all mean? For that, we turn to Allie Renison, the head of EU and trade policy for the Institute of Directors, the oldest business membership organization in the UK. Thank you very much for joining us on the NewsHour, Allie Renison. Why no consensus in Parliament today?
I think it's a reflection of the fact that the government went headlong into this negotiation without actually trying to figure out if there was a consensus in Parliament. You had the opposition party, the Labour Party, saying for quite some time it was not going to back her deal unless it met the kind of test that it wanted, but there wasn't a lot of reaching across the aisle. And lo and behold, the deal has now been rejected twice. Interestingly, I think actually one of the implications of tonight's lack of consensus, apart from voting against no deal, is that it actually potentially makes getting the deal through, this is a separate process, potentially more likely. I think the very close votes, even though there wasn't a clear majority for anything other than no deal, reflect the fact that actually there's a lot of Conservative MPs who were opposed to the deal who may now think that because of the close results, if they don't back the deal, you may get a longer extension, which facilitates another referendum. And so we may actually end up having a vote on the deal on Friday, and that will be a really close call.
Right, so let's take this step by step. As you said, there is a parallel process for Theresa May's version of Brexit. The government tonight says, well, look, Parliament, you couldn't come to a consensus, so therefore you should endorse Theresa May's version of Brexit. So that has to happen according to the EU this week. As you said, it could happen Friday. Do these votes mean that she actually has the votes to pass her version of Brexit, given that it would be the third time that she's actually brought it to a vote?
Not necessarily. Now, the numbers have been shrinking every time. That's not because the opposition parties have been any less opposed to the deal, but more because the closer we get to an exit date, and particularly because Parliament keeps voting against no deal, I think there are a lot of parliamentarians in the Conservative Party who are worried about if they continue to oppose the deal, they will lose Brexit altogether. Now, the one big question mark of all that is the party that actually props up the Conservative Party in government, which is one of the main unionist party in Northern Ireland. And they don't like the deal because they think effectively Party. It treats Northern Ireland differently. It keeps Northern Ireland tied under an insurance policy if they can't sort the Irish border in the next phase, more closely aligned to the EU than the rest of the UK, and they don't particularly like that. And those numbers, because we have what's called the hung parliament in the UK, where it's a minority government supported by this other unionist party, means it's very, very difficult to actually call. And the Prime Minister has said that she doesn't want to bring the deal back until she absolutely has the numbers, but that may be a case of better late than never. You have to try and get it through on Friday. The only other, I think, concern about that is the Speaker of the House has said that you can't actually vote on something more than twice, certainly that looks the exact same. So there is a question mark about the Speaker's impartiality and whether he will actually block the deal from coming back a third time.
So if that deal can't be voted on a third time, or if she can't get it through, does that mean a longer extension?
It looks more likely. Now, there are some Conservative MPs who are sanguine and okay with no deal, who think that the Prime Minister should just ignore Parliament's votes against no deal because technically it's non-binding and they think the government should act. The reality is, politically, that would be a big, big deal for Theresa May, the Prime Minister. She has said that she will listen to the will of Parliament, and the only thing so far expressed is an opposition to no deal. And we know that from the conditions that the EU set out last week in agreeing to this extension, that the only other outcome, if they don't vote for the deal this week, is a longer extension where you have to participate in European elections. And that's obviously a politically fraught issue on this side of the pond, because a lot of people who voted leave don't want to be in a situation where 3 years having voted to leave the European Union, we are still electing British representatives to the European institutions.
And so very quickly, Allie Renison, in the 30 seconds we have left, is this going to lead to some kind of more dramatic moment, for example, another general election in the UK?
I think potentially, because and you have had some of the Prime Minister's own members of her parties who supported leave saying effectively, if you can't get the deal through, if you cannot get your legislation relating to the deal through, you can't govern, and therefore you need another election. The question mark being, does a general election actually solve anything in the long run?
And that is the big question. Allie Renison, head of EU and trade policy for the Institute of Directors, thank you very much.